My staff has proven me wrong once again. I told them that, when we have Eventbrite reservations, we can only expect half the people to show up. So we upped the invitations a little bit. But thank you all. We really appreciate you all being here today. My name is Mariana Ramirez, and I am the director of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at Portland State University. Thank you all so much for joining us for a conversation with Heidi Schwegler and Joshua Sin, two of the artists in our exhibition, Just Playin Around, as well as our exhibition's co-curators, Theo and Nancy Downs-Guin. Before we get started, I'm going to circle back to Theo and Nancy. But before we do that, I would first like to thank my staff. They are absolutely amazing. I know many of you have had a chance to engage with them. I would especially, though, like to give a shout out to Anna Kienberger, who organized today's talk. And Estella Garzon, who is in the museum now preparing for our reception after this, so which I'd invite you all to join us afterwards. I would also like to thank our amazing supporters. We couldn't do this without you. I'd like to thank the Ford Family Foundation, the Reeser Family Foundation, Jackson Foundation, Elements Roofing, the Richard and Helen Phillips Charitable Fund, and the JSMA Exhibition Circle, which is made up of a group of dedicated supporters to our museum, a few of which are here in the talk today, and I thank you very much. And of course, Jordan Schnitzer and the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation for their continued support of our museum. Could we give a round of applause for our supporters? Thank you. Just Playin Around was conceived in the summer of 2023. I was having drinks with Theo and Nancy and lamenting that I didn't know what to do for our exhibition during this time period. And Theo and Nancy, some of you may know, curated an exhibition here, Weaving Data, a couple years ago, which was fantastic. And they're familiar with my goals for the museum. I want our space to be welcoming to people who may not have grown up going to museums like myself, or maybe new to contemporary art. I also want our exhibitions to be interdisciplinary as a way to engage with students from across the campus. With that in mind, about a week later, they both approached me and said they had an idea for an exhibition on play. And they kindly said, "This is a gift, you can just take this idea and run with it." To which I said, lobbed it back to them and said, "Well, would you curate it for us?" So, which I am so grateful. I know many of you may not have had a chance yet to see the exhibition, but it is fantastic. And I think you will be delighted as I am. Now, one of the things I know about Theo and Nancy after 2 exhibitions is that they hate boring biographical details. And so we have a couple questions. I'm going to give them a very short interview here so that you all can have a better understanding of their psyche. So, Theo, Nancy, after a long day of curating and having to hear me say no one too many times, what do you drink when you go home?
That changes the answer when you say after.
After hearing no?
So that would definitely be a Manhattan for me.
Oh. Man, ooh, I like that.
And I would be a perfect Manhattan with a orange twist, but a double if it's been a lot of no's.
Thank you. Actually, Josh, could she borrow your microphone since I have hers? Thanks. All right, so the next question is actually a question I think about a lot, and I actually invite you all to ponder this question as well. Let's imagine that your portrait's going to go up into the National Portrait Gallery. They're going to hang it in the halls for the public to see. What artist, Nancy and Theo, would you select to paint your portrait?
David Hockney.
Oh, Hockney, nice.
I would not have it painted. Mm-hmm. I would have a little installation by Laurie Simmons.
Oh, I love that. All right, and last question to get to know them. You two have to settle a dispute with each other. And you decided that in order to settle this dispute, you're going to play a game, and the winner of the game wins the dispute. What game would you select?
Well, we do daily play a game called Spite and Malice, so I think
that is a real game. That's not just a figure of speech.
Yes. So I think that it might have to be Spite and Malice, but that doesn't sound very playful.
Theo?
Well, we have to be playing the same game, right? So I
Well-
guess I would have the same answer, but Spite and Malice is like 70% chance and 30% skill.
Okay.
That's because I win more than he does.
Okay. But if we were doing more skill-based, I would say bananagrams would be another good match
All
that we
right.
play frequently.
Well, thank you all. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Theo, Heidi, Josh, and Nancy.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for that amusing intro, Mariana. Heidi's worried that the room is so crowded that it's a fire hazard, so please take a moment. Please take a moment to locate the emergency exit nearest you, and remember it may be behind you. So, given our antipathy to starting with bios, we asked the artists to talk about themselves a little bit, so we're going to kick that off with Heidi.
That's not what we thought we were going to do. So this is kind of Pechacucha style, and we decided to just do a really quick presentation on the process that it took to get to the work in the museum. And these chairs are horrible, so I'm going to stand up. Actually, it's just easier for me to do it this way. So I'm going to try to keep this under 4 minutes. So I'm going to talk really fast, and I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff on you. So humor is a part of my work. Play, not so much. I'm going to let you think about the difference between the two of those, or maybe we'll talk about it in the discussion. So when I was first, thank you so much for inviting me to be in the show, first of all. But when I first got the word play, I did deep dive into research on play, and I found this book called The Elements of Play by Scott Eberl, I'm not sure how to say his name, but the 5 most salient characteristics of play would be voluntary, it's fun, there are rules that you can break, there should be an element of curiosity and a suspension of time. And any artist or anybody in the creative field would know that's probably a part of your flow in terms of the studio. And then I was really excited to find this S-curve graph, which shows the range of play to non-play. Polarity is always inherent in my work, so those, again, of you who know my work would understand that that's important to me. And always, too much of a good thing can be a very bad thing. So I began to research, okay, I'll probably make a toy. When did people start to play? And I found the first 2 examples of toys from 4,000 years ago. And the rattle looks exactly like what we would see today. It was a ceramic rattle with stones. And this is a little 1/2-inch stone doll about the size of your pinky. The reason why they think it was a doll is because they found it next to a miniature kitchenware set, which is incredible. And of course, then I go to toys that kill. The absolute opposite of what a toy should do. So the CSI fingerprint analysis kit, it's all this powder that you throw over your house, right, inside, only to find out it was made in China and it's full of toxic chemicals. The Hasbro javelin dart can pierce a human skull, and the WeGo kite tube goes without saying, that is a child in that balloon. So if you have not read Xian Nagai's book, Our Aesthetic Categories, I totally recommend it. It's a little dense, hard to read, but it's really important. She's talking about 3 new words that we should be using with our vocabulary when talking about contemporary art. The zany, the cute, and the interesting. For her, the cute is something blobby and small. And if it has a face, the eyes are really big. If there's a mouth, it's very small, so it can't talk back to you. So there is a sort of sinister side to cute. Cuteness is a way of aestheticizing powerlessness. Do animals play? Have any of you seen this viral video? If you have not, you need to watch it immediately. We weren't allowed to have videos, so I couldn't bring it for you. But with this one, the turtle on the bottom has these arms that come up, and it kind of tickle, tickle, tickle. It's got these long fingers, and it tickles the face of the other turtle.
That's mating behavior.
Oh. Did I want to know that? Well, that is playful. So now we know that animals play. And so then I go to, well, do cockroaches play? What about bugs? They play dead, but they probably don't play. So these are bugs that I found. I live in the Mojave Desert, so they're desert-style bugs. And I do want to say, because I was talking to Josh, that one on the bottom right is a tarantula hawk, which is the most horrifying insect in the world, FYI. So my idea was to take the bugs, cast them in metal, scale them up, and put them on remote control cars for you guys so that you could play games. So obviously I'm going to interaction with the idea of the toy, but that remote control car only lasts about 30 minutes, and I didn't want out of order for 5 months on the museum wall. So in my height of frustration, I went to my studio, grabbed a plastic cup, filled it with alginate, which is body-safe mold material, shoved it on my face and started pouring waxes into the molds. I grabbed a hummus cup, which is a little bit shallow, and I pushed so hard that my nose got flat and it opened up my nostrils, which then took me to, oh, I should make a cornhole toss, and you're gonna throw bean bags into my nostrils. And by the way, Walmart, I saw this on packaging, there's actually an association for cornholes. So this was my maquette that I think I said to Theo and Nancy in the museum, and they're like, no. We're not going to have a sculpture where you're throwing things in the museum. But just to give you a sense of how I was thinking, and you can see the actual piece when you go to the show after this. And then the last two images I want to show you, this is life scale. I was just playing with different parts from my face and I'm like, I do not know where I'm going with this. I knew I wanted it bigger, so that's really big. I then went to a bar with a friend and I showed it to her and she's like, oh, have you ever heard of the mouth of truth? And I was like, no. So if you've heard of this is a huge concrete, I think it was a sewer cover, and then they made it vertical, and they would have criminals stick their hands in the mouth, and if they were lying, it would eat their hand, which was basically a very large man with a sword cutting their hand off. You guys are supposed to be funny. And now it's a tourist attraction, and people can ask a question and put their hand in there. And that is my Pechacucha.
There will be a quiz later.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Sin. I'm going to just talk about my projects and a little bit about me, so let's go with this. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I'm Canadian. My parents are originally from Hong Kong, China, and they grew up with not a lot. They were very starving immigrant folks, and basically what they did with the 4 kids of us is they gave us everything. So I was a professional gymnast. I represented Canada at 2 World Championships. I was able to play piano, and I have a concert degree in concert piano as well. So that is kind of my form of play, is this thing of flow and finding these flow states. But my playground actually starts here. 3 years ago, I did the Guin residency where I had access to the Northwest Transfer Station. This place is a wild playground where you're able to pick garbage out of the place and transform it into stuff. So a lot of my work is about trash, like Heidi, where we use trash to transform it into something else. And that's really been the crux to everything that I do. From there, I created these 12 descendants. These are all inspired by trash, but also my ancestral background and bringing those Asian culture as well as this Western influence from the past, present, and future into what we can become, what these things. So this is a little bit of a glimpse into the work that I try to do. And then what we're doing here for play into Just Playing Around is a continuation of that. So I have 2 bodies of work. One of them is on monuments, and then the second one is on satire. I'll dive deeper into each of these, but satire, there's 3 pieces in the basement, and this was inspired by my working culture. My day job, I work in corporate America, probably a lot like a lot of you, and these are kind of my 2 weird obsessions with corporate culture. Is one, the monotony of working in a corporate culture. I feel like every day I'm in a simulation where I'm talking to people and being like, how are you? And having to get everyone to say yes. But also the absurdity of CEOs. CEOs are getting murdered, but at the same time, like you see these people who are being like, I'm gonna create my own city, or I'm gonna go, I don't know, everyone's gonna have to return to work, but I'm gonna fly my corporate plane and go to work Tuesday to Thursday. So it's this weird absurdity of corporateness that we kind of do. So satire was really inspired by all of that. And what I wanted to do was kind of flip it on its head and create this new brand, a new business kind of making and mocking of corporateness. So this is Double Happiness, the brand for satire. It is a traditional Chinese symbol meaning double happiness. And I thought it's very traditional. It's often used in weddings and when you have twins. But I wanted to use it as a capitalist symbol for buying more and getting that buyer's high remorse. So double happiness and buying more stuff. And with this corporation, I wanted to use corporate speak and kind of create these language of like this vision and mission, what does this stand for, and kind of reject everything that corporate America is actually about. Anti-capitalist, anti-fashion, anti-sexism, and actually really going back to what can we create for this. So the satire journey, it's about a CEO who he invents this crazy AI life coach essentially, and this life coach sends him on this journey to basically creates a schedule 9 to 5. This is what exactly you have to do. So the AI life coach sends him, you need to go meet this artist and you need to go start a lifestyle brand called Satire. And the journey goes between this artist and the CEO and what they do, but it's also integrated into this anti-fashion show. And the anti-fashion show kind of goes to this point about how do we talk about how corporations are messing up fashion in the sense. So there's 3 chapters of the procession, which is like brands as religion, but also looking at exploitation of heritage, and then the rebellion. What happens with this piece in this performance, this was performed at Shaking the Tree Theater in Southeast, and what is happening in this thing you're kind of seeing glimpses of the final chapter of the rebellion when the CEO finally has a meltdown at the end, and you have these childhood shadows that are coming out of the woods to kind of console him. And what I have in this presentation in the show is essentially these 3 characters that you'll see down below. These are 3 childhood characters of pleasure, imagination, and joy. And these are kind of the 3 that you'll see down below. They're both spirits as well as shadows, but they are kind of pieces of that costume. And then there's also a featured film that we kind of converted from the play into that. So you'll see that a little bit more. The second stuff that you'll see are monuments. So these are kind of 3 giant stuffed animals that I've created, sculpture. I call them soft sculptures that I've created from Guin, and you'll kind of see them there. But I was really attracted to this one word in Portuguese called saudade. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's this bittersweet, melancholic yearning for something beautiful that is now and gone. Perhaps a love affair, a childhood home, a flourishing business. There is pain, yet also pleasure, that such loveliness once graced our lives. And I remember when I was about 5 years old, I used to dance quite a bit. I loved dancing. I performed it. And then all of a sudden, there was one day when that energy was just lost. And there was kind of this shame attached to it. I didn't want to perform in front of anyone else. And this missing, this longing for this childhood was really the key to both these bodies of work from satire as well as monuments. I created these 3 sculptures initially before I met Nancy and Theo for my nieces and nephew, and actually kind of created these custom things, these hacking of stuffed animals. But really these sketches of these body parts coming together and how do they all do that was really the inspiration to a lot of the work that I have done. In my work, I have often played with AI quite a bit. So this is kind of a sketch on what does AI look at in terms of these body parts. But when I went to the Goodwill bins, what attracted me when I first started to find these were I would find these childhood stuffed animals and then actually find names attached to them. So this is actually Liam, which is kind of funny, but this is what I've been really looking at and what I can do with that. And then this is just me making. I think a lot of my work is about getting into this flow state and working with my hands. I think when you work with your hands, you slow down, you kind of get into this flow state, and that's really important to the work that I have done. So the three structures that I have, the monuments, are kind of a dedication to these moments of childhood loss. It looks at three different generations of play, from the 80s to 90s, from the traditional play of brown bears to the 2000s of Beanie Babies, and then the early into like the 2010s, where it's all about like the ultra kawaii Japanese motion of play. So it looks at that, but it also talks about other things. So would love to hear your thoughts as you walk through the gallery to see what else it can become and what you think of them. So thank you.
Thank you both. Heidi had proposed when we started planning this session that it should be titled Talking Trash.
Let's talk some trash.
Okay, let's talk some trash. So I think the reasons for that are probably more clear to you now. You've both been using discarded materials for some time in your work, but in kind of different ways. And Heidi, I wonder if we could start with you and just give us a little bit of the history of how you started with that and what it means for you in your work.
I'm really amazed at how I don't know, this is weird. Just everything he was saying really resonates with me, it's really exciting to meet another artist who has the same kind of sensitivities, which maybe a lot of people do, I don't know. But thinking about the first time, and I had a feeling this was going to be a question, so I have been thinking about it. And there are, if I could just tell two really quick anecdotes. We were flipping a house in North Portland, because I lived here for 20 years. I now live in the Mojave Desert. And we were flipping a house on Greeley, and he had bought some huge tool. It was in a heavy-duty cardboard box. Threw it out in the backyard like you do when your house is completely under construction, and it was there for a year. And you can imagine what happens in Portland for a year on cardboard. And I went outside one afternoon and I saw it, and it was slumped in such a beautiful pose that it instantly reminded me of my own mortality. And I began to think, that was not supposed to be funny. I'm kidding. So there was something about its position that made me think of the body in a very relaxed pose. So I took the effort of cutting it up into about 5 different pieces, thickening it, and I had it cast in aluminum. So it became a sort of memorial to that piece. The second anecdote, I was still in North Portland, and I was walking to the market, and I saw a metal shed that you buy from Home Depot in somebody's backyard, and it actually took my breath away, where something had fallen on it, and it was the body. There was something about its position that made me think of just time and the body and decay. And I think I even called the people because I wanted it. And they thought that was very odd because it no longer functioned like a shed. So I respond to trash. I respond to things that are discarded in the street corner. But I don't like all trash. And I have really deeply thought about this. Because I don't want you to send me your trash. There are 3 things that need to be present. 1, what was its original function? I'm going to respond a lot more to a pillow than I am an Epson printer, right? So there's something inherent about its original function that is very intimate with the body. The second thing is, what is the damage that it has endured? Is it just kicked and it's by the trash can? Or was it thrown out of an 18-wheeler, like one of those ladders that you see off the highway? And then the third thing is, what is its position in space? And when all of those things come together, it works for me. Like I had a friend once who was...
Clarify what you mean by position in space.
It's like, okay, there was a mattress on a street corner in LA that had been bungeed so tight that it looked like it was springing open. So it wasn't just laying flat. There was something about its position that kind of activated this piece of trash. And it's also, we're seeing things that are super intimate in our homes now in a place where they never should be seen. So I'm rambling now, but those are probably my first 2, just becoming aware of the fact that I like what people are throwing out.
So one difference I see is that you almost always materially transform the trash into something else. So a cardboard box becomes aluminum,
right,
for example. Josh, you work with the trash as is, so you transform it formally, but you're not remaking it in another material.
Yes. Sorry, had to turn that on for a second. Material for me is interesting, like working at the transfer station and having full access to the amount of trash, you realize that none of it actually goes away. Like, we put it in our blue bins, we put it in our trash, but it actually just gets shipped off 300 miles down the road, and it sits there forever, essentially. But it's interesting to see what you can find and how do you transform it. In our home, in our bathroom, my partner Philip, we have this wall where it's all these photographs that have been found from the dump that have been discarded, and we have them all posted up in our wall, and it showcases all the memories that are these people. And we often ask this question of, like, how do these memories last? Like, how will you actually be remembered after you are gone? I think I've read this one stat, it's only like you're gone for like 2 generations and then you're not remembered anymore. But what do we leave behind, and how do we use those memories to create something new? So whenever I find something like the Liam doll, which has like a nostalgic thing to it, it actually belongs to someone, it has a lot of energy into it. So I like to use those energies and create something, transforming it into something else.
So is it usually the idea that comes first or the materials for you, Josh?
I think the material. There's something when you go to the Goodwill bins or the transfer station, and probably when you're like gleaning outside, there's something that you're attracted to. Kind of similar to when you go shopping and you see something shiny and you're like, why am I super attracted to that? There's a reason why you were attracted to certain materials when you have abundance of it. And it holds like a certain memory, probably something that's been put into you when you're 2 years old or something, but there's a visceral reaction to why you're holding on to that specific moment. So I think that is important, and it's worth asking yourself, like, why are you choosing the specific color or the specific shirt? Because there's a lot of intention, DNA embedded into what that is.
Well, speaking of specificity, Heidi, how do you decide what medium you're going to transform your trash into?
Well, I choose materials that best service the idea. And I also like to think about, because I do a lot of casting in my work. I don't know how familiar you guys are. Like, I'll take a styrofoam cooler that I found in the desert. You know, the desert is a sort of craftsperson. So when the styrofoam flies out into the desert because of the Santa Ana winds, it doesn't make it very far because everything's super pokey. There's the Joshua tree, there's the cholla, everything is really sharp. And so the styrofoam cooler just kind of sits there and it moves in the wind, and the desert files it, and the sand exfoliates it, and it literally shapes the trash for me. And it even patinas it with this brilliant sort of yellow. And then I clean the desert by gathering this stuff, bring it to my studio, and I do think alchemically in terms of what does this need to become. I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but I did start a lab in the desert that has all sorts of, it has like a foundry, it has glass casting, it has different ways of transforming material. So I'm able to use the lab then to change it into the material that it needs to be. And more often than not, I'm taking something completely worthless and valueless, and I am flipping it into something that has intrinsic value, or what we think as intrinsic value, or a sense of fragility, like glass. So what happens when you see a styrofoam container then that's been cast in glass? It is fragile, it is expensive, it was really hard to make. You know, it flips your understanding on what you thought you understood about a styrofoam container. That's ultimately what I try to do with most of my work.
And you have 2 examples right there.
I do. So these are 2 examples that broke in the shipping process. Getting them up here. Let's see. This is my little cockroach. So this was a dead cockroach in my studio. This is how big they are in the Mojave Desert. Totally kidding. You know, don't get grossed out by something. If you're an artist, just make something with it. So I took the dead cockroach and I did centrifugal casting to cast it into sterling silver. And I got such incredible detail with the hair and the antenna that I decided this sucker needs to be big. So I sent it to Form XYZ, huge plug for that place. They're in Portland, Oregon. They are incredible. They scanned that little cockroach. It took him a while, because then he called me and he said, sorry this is taking so long. I wasn't realizing your cockroach was going to be so small. And I'm like, well, how big are your cockroaches? So he scanned it, he scaled it up. And do you know that famous fountain, Le Petit Pisser in Belgium? I turned it into a cockroach pitcher, a pisser fountain. So I scaled them, but this is, scaled up a little bit and then printed in resin and then painted with metal or metallic paint. And then this is one of the tires that's in the show, cast in wax, that kind of broke in the shipping process. So we thought we would just have some materials for you guys to be able to touch and look at and feel. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Heidi, so this is our first working relationship with Josh, and it's been delightful, but Heidi and I have been working together for quite a while, on and off, for over a decade. And when I had a gallery, one of the first art shows I did was the Seattle Art Fair, and I brought some of Heidi's work, and I brought that cast aluminum box, cardboard box that I did not realize was your first foray into trash. And I thought that as a new gallerist, I thought that would be a really great idea to bring a cast aluminum cardboard box to an art fair.
It did not sell.
It did not, which actually still surprises me because it is such an exquisite work. But I learned a lot about how people react to your work in public spaces from that, because it's very disconcerting to people a lot of the time, because it's recognizable. It's, in that case, exactly to scale. It is such a precise remaking of the original object that you could actually see the threads of fiber cast in aluminum where the corrugated cardboard was ripped. And people did not know what to do with it. Half of them didn't know whether it was actually just a cardboard box that had been spray painted. Some people thought it had been left there by accident, and they helpfully came to tell me that there was refuse in my booth at the art fair. And some people absolutely loved it, but apparently could not imagine owning it and living with it. Right. And I bring that up just because I think in both of your work, I see a similar comfort/discomfort that people have when they're around it. Comfort because it's familiar, discomfort because you've made it unfamiliar. And I wonder whether that is intentional or just a byproduct of other things you're interested in.
I think that alludes to lightness and darkness a little bit. It was interesting, even building out the monuments that you'll see on the first floor with the stuffed animals. I abstracted a couple of them and then also kind of showcased like the full body of some of them. So it gives you that a little bit of that familiarity of stuffed animals. And I think the combination of the two is interesting and important. In the work that I did for those monuments, I was trying to play with my younger self, doing an art project with yourself as a 6-year-old, like embodying the shadow of this past, what would that create? And I think my younger 6-year-old would have been like, yeah, go put that purple turd at the top of the thing. It looks great. My current self would be like, no, like it needs to look beautiful and fine art. So I think pulling in those tensions between the reality and something that is familiar as well as abstracting is kind of a blend between those two. And I think it's really powerful. I think there's tension in that. And I think a lot of art does do that in a way.
My elevator speech used to be that I make beautiful objects about messy and depressing subject matter. I don't want to make messy objects about messy subject matter because that's redundant and there's no tension. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, polarity, tension, friction is always important to me in my work. And then the other anecdote I will give you, I have many, many stories. But I did a residency in Beijing, and I was on the fifth ring by Ai Weiwei's Hutong. And it was one of the most humid summers in their history, and also heavily, heavily polluted, because at that point they were ripping down all the hutongs. So that made my vision really poor. Like, it was hard to see with all that stuff in the air. And I'll never forget standing at the edge of the hutong, and I saw something at the end that was so big and so foreign, I just kind of shuddered because I didn't know what I was looking at. At that point, this is called perceptual blindness, your vision becomes very acute because you're trying so hard to see. When I saw that it was a huge pile of cardboard boxes, all I could think was, this is sublime. To be able to see a cardboard box again for the first time is ultimately what I'm trying to do with all of my work. Whether it's flipping an object that you recognize into a material that's totally opposite to its function, or like I think what you're saying is to offer something that maybe doesn't fit comfortably within the lexicon of what fine art should be, or even placing it in the museum in a way that Kathleen is going to kill me for, because she had to install this work and it's on the floor. And people might trip on it, and it's not on a pedestal, and it makes people uncomfortable. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you both, you induce that discomfort, but you do also give people access to those objects in a new way, and you kind of force us to take a step back and look at things that slide off our eyes most of the time, not just because they're trash, but because they're familiar, and you go about it in different ways, but it's fascinating to me, and it feels very invigorating, to be compelled to look at those objects in a completely new light, and to look at them as objects of value, whether you have valorized them through the material choices or just through the level of craft that's put in them. Mm-hmm. So good job.
How are we doing on time?
We're doing great.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. So working in this exhibition about play, Heidi, you too were saying play was not, you work with humor, not play. You work with play, Josh, some. So has your idea about play evolved through working in this exhibition or changed?
Yeah, I would say so. So like contextually growing up, I never really had summers. It's like summers for me were like play the piano for 3 hours a day and like do an exam, literally. So play for me was all about this state of finding flow through piano or being a gymnast and doing flips and like repetition and routine and again. I think now having this, I think satire, the play, and that last scene of the CEO and the spirits coming back in and trying to merge with your younger shadow, I think that's actually a really interesting challenge to go beyond that. Like, take one aspect of your life, a younger self, whether it be an 8-year-old or like the ugliest you, and what is that version of you, and do a project with it, and what would that look like? I think that would be really interesting, and I think in some ways these monuments are that. They're different stages of my life, and you're playing around with that. So I think it's that, and I think it's also, for me, since I'm such a maker, just doing quantity, like repetition again and again, and just getting it all out. I think it's, as you're older, it's a lot more difficult to find that flow. And I think having to practice and do it again and doing tons and tons and tons is really important. So it's an ongoing thing. I'm going to share this out so you can kind of touch it, but this is kind of just like a soft prototype that I did last night.
He's got to throw it.
Josh, could you, before you answer the question, Heidi,
sure.
Josh, could you talk a little bit about how you made your monuments? Because people might not realize how you took the things apart. And
Yeah. So the two towers out there are made with about 100 stuffed animals. And what I do is I find them from the Goodwill bins, I take them home, I clean them, and then cut them up, deconstruction, sew them up again, and then reassemble all of it. So it's more of like a puzzle more than anything to kind of reassemble it and kind of see what works and what doesn't work. And the thing is, like, when you're in this flow state, you're kind of just like using your arms and kind of trusting your gut in some ways, and I think that's important. And then like stepping back 30 minutes later and being like, is this even good or not? But I think when you're in that flow state, you're not thinking about is it good or is it bad. It is what it is, and that's kind of the fun of it, and finding that is really important.
And I would like to also say that Josh was very kind about changing your initial idea of the monuments, and that they weren't going to be ones that you could go and touch. And we loved how tactile they were when we came to your studio. And so there, you'll see that you can hug the monuments. You can go and get some love from the monuments.
Please do not hug my nose.
Yes. Well, because we know when you put your hand in the mouth of truth, what might happen. Yeah. So Heidi, what about you?
I can't really remember the question, but I do have
idea of play.
When I did the S-curve thing, when I found that, and I was like sitting there thinking, yeah, when does like the office prank become bullying? When does tickling become torture? When does it tip? Because it starts from one thing, but it can so easily go wrong. And it was like, did I play as a kid? Did I do that? And I started thinking about and speaking of piano, we had to do it for 11 years, but only the girls had to do it. The boy could do whatever he wanted. And the piano was in the basement. And so Brigitta, I, for some reason, wanted to torture my little sister. So she'd be down there, practicing piano. And I would literally spend an hour crawling behind everything in the room until I would get right behind her and jump out and scare the hell out of her. That is not cool. So that was
But it is play.
Yeah.
It is play. It was play for me. But then, where was I going? Oh, play for me now, because I do think more conceptually about humor. So I had to think about, well, really, what's the difference between play and humor? And for me, personally, I think of play as more action. Two people or one person, but it's action. It's over time. It's acting something out. Whereas humor can be it can be sarcastic, it can be sardonic, it can be sad, it can be lighthearted, but it's more of an ambiance or a flavor or something like that.
Or perhaps it's more in the head as opposed to
acting out.
Yeah.
So this challenge for this show, I immediately felt pressure for the very first time to make things that people could touch or interact with, and granted, that wasn't the directive, but for some reason I went there, which was a great challenge. Will I ever do it again? Maybe not, but...
Well, it wasn't not the directive, because when you brought up that distinction between play and humor at the very beginning of this discussion, that resonates with us, because in the very early days of planning the exhibition, we were kind of going through that taxonomy of what is play as well, and looking at some of the research. And really the animal research is much more interesting than human research about what is play and what constitutes playful behavior. But,
Except in turtles.
I just don't think that's all that different. But that distinction with play and humor, I think we really did sort of veer away from humor to some degree, and that also reflects, I think, my point of view that humor is pretty well represented in contemporary art, usually tending toward the sardonic or sarcastic, but play and playfulness is not as well represented. So we didn't want to exclude humor, and they do intersect at so many points in this exhibition and elsewhere, but I'm kind of glad you picked up what we were putting down, because we weren't trying to make a rule around that, but also, we didn't really want to do the banana duct tape to the wall, which I see as an attempt at humor, but not remotely playful.
I think humor is great. Like the satire work, I'm thinking about this, like the satire work in the basement is kind of mocking corporate culture. And I think a play is a great way to kind of showcase the unknowns, the underbellies of capitalism in corporate America. And like, what a great way to use like a local community stage to do that and kind of just mock the whole situation, mock those CEOs who stand up and says these beautiful long speeches that mean absolutely nothing, and like put it on its head and kind of do that. So I think, to your point, like the headiness of it, like the conceptual mind space of it, I think as we get older, we put this conceptual lens on it, which is pretty exciting. I think it's worth like a conceptual way to think about art in a way. And yes, it can be physical and finding flow that way, but still that conceptual mental gymnastics that we're doing in our heads to like make fun and poke fun at something is actually pretty special.
Mm-hmm.
I think that plays changed for me in this exhibition, and it's partly what you were saying, Josh, that I go and see more parts of my life as play than I had before, when I'm getting in that flow state and really playing around with ideas. So it's helped me to recognize play.
What would you like people to take away from their experience with your work in this exhibition? What cocktail do you like to drink after a hard day in the studio?
I think because in the last year, I am determined, in fact, it's on my wall in the studio, no more inhibition. And I think the challenge for this, because play was not something that I would have normally gone to, it allowed me to do something. And when you guys see the work, if you know my work, this was a little bit of a stretch. And I think if you can walk away, and you will hear no when you go to my piece, but to walk away feeling like, let's be a little bit braver. And I really do feel that some of the strongest work out there is because it lacks inhibition, and I think it's really important. And so this was a gift in letting me kind of try that out.
I think for me, I think our current life right now is so serious. And I think this exhibition is asking this question, like, why so serious? Like, I think we need to liven up a little bit and be a little bit looser and have more of this flow state and just have fun. And I think that's really the question that we should all be asking is, like, how do we have more fun? How do we have more fun in our daily life? The most mundane thing, cooking or like walking the dog, like things that are mundane, but how do you actually turn those into moments of joy and happiness? So have more fun, find those moments of mundane and turn it into something more rejuvenating.
Hug a sculpture.
I'm sort of a serious person by nature, so this exhibition theme was a stretch for me, even though I participated in coming up with it. And so I resonate so much with what both of you said. But there's also an aspect of play as a form of resistance and a long history of that in art. And without being too heavy-handed about the moment we're in right now, I'm interested in your thoughts about the role of artists and the use of play and humor as a form of critique and resistance.
When my neighbor put up a huge galvanized fence and blocked my desert view, I was hysterical. And I was like crying to my dad, and he said, "You're an artist, build something." So I built this beautiful wood fence that now blocks the reflection of that galvanized fence, and it was so incredibly empowering. I built a 120-foot fence in 3 days, and I am like 4'11" and 100 pounds. So it's like, don't get angry, build something, do something, make it active. That's why I started this, I'm going to start sounding like a salesman, but I actually started an art school in the desert that's all about hands-on material exploration, because we are losing that in this country. And I also have been noticing in the news with LA, which is my neighbor, and the horrific things that just happened there, and the things that happen in North Carolina, that the people who are going out and are instantly rebuilding those places are artists, because they know how to use their hands, they know how to use chainsaws, they know how to just take something, a piece of dirt, and make something beautiful out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think working with your hands is probably the best way to soothe yourself. There's a reason why I like to sew and work with tactile materials. It's kind of very soothing. So I think that is something that we can control. I think for me, satire, again, the play was this moment in my career, in my time, where I'm like, I really hate my work. I hate what's going on with this corporate America thing. Why am I even doing this? I really want to quit my job. And in some ways, this was kind of a rebellion of me stepping aside and kind of mocking what was going on. We had a terrible CEO at that moment, and we wanted to kind of make fun of it. And this was kind of a way to kind of release some of that stuff. I think doing what you can do within your control. We are all creative people, and finding that control is important, but also playing with our hands and then seeing what you can do within that circle of yours and seeing what you can actually come up with. We have the freedom to do that. I want you to all feel inspired to go out and have that freedom to go do that. And I think that's important. I think as an artist, we all have a voice. We have this ode to creative expression, and the work that you see in that is a creative expression of all of us. So I think use that power to do that. You have the power.
Thank you.
I'm really happy we could include an actual representation of an actual play in an exhibition about play. It turns out to be surprisingly difficult to bring theater, to bring that kind of play into a museum setting. So it was wonderful that you gave us that opportunity. And I really appreciate, I hope we all get the chance to see that play again someday, not just the kind of evidence of it that we're able to present here. But I do appreciate the pointedness of that play as well. You know, that it is very funny, and it is sort of a well-meaning satire. In a way, it's kind, but also it doesn't pull any punches. So I think that is a great example of stepping outside of, in some ways, the kind of classic visual artist domain and doing something else that still fits with the rest of your practice. We are almost out of time. Is there anything else you wanted to work in there? Yeah. We can probably take 2 questions.
Wow.
The artists, but they have to be short and good.
It better be good.
So the artists will also be at the reception, and you're welcome to pepper them with questions at that time if I can extend that offer.
I'm just glad I didn't fall off my chair.
Yet.
Anything anyone has been burning to ask?
So I have a really important question. When you took apart these stuffed animals and put them back together again, did you use all the parts?
No, in my basement I still have like 50 parts, and I have 3 bags of cotton filling that I need to figure out what to do with.
New sculpture.
And I have to say, we went on a studio visit. It was so wonderful and so fascinating to see this all happening in Josh's basement. But I will never get the image of that workbench with all these body parts of stuffed animals dissected. I mean, it was like something between Teletubbies and a serial killer horror show.
And I feel like that was your dining room table.
Yeah. Eat them for breakfast.
Right. Another question.
Oh, only one question.
All right.
Josh, I wanted to ask you, talked about, I think you just said that you work in corporate America. You could elaborate on that at all. But you kind of described it almost like a game. It's like, I think you mentioned Sims at one point. So it doesn't sound fun. And then at another point you talked about trying to make things that are sort of banal more enjoyable, like walking the dog or cooking or whatever. This is sort of asking for advice, I guess, but have you found any ways to make your job more fun, more play in your corporate America job?
Yeah. There's a tool that I use is gratitude, essentially. Like every single day on my car ride to work and from home, I say 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. And that has actually really helped me like kind of flip that narrative on its head. Like, yeah, I might have had like a stupid day, but like I think about like what actually mattered to me. And then another tool that I use is like on my deathbed, if I had a crappy day and I'm thinking about it, well, I even think about this on my deathbed. And that's really helped me give me context of like, hey, what happened to me today at work actually doesn't matter at all. So let it go and continue on with your life. But I think those 2 tools of gratitude and then being on your deathbed is kind of
See, back to mortality.
yeah, mortality.
And then being grateful you're not on your deathbed.
Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Heidi and Josh. Thank you to JSMA for hosting us this afternoon, and you're all in for a treat. You're extremely well prepared to enjoy these artworks now. So enjoy, and thank you for coming.